There are two types of stances you can use for the forehand, the open stance and the neutral stance. Before I talk about that, I want to first talk about my feet. If I'm right-handed and I'm hitting a forehand, my right leg is going to be called my outside leg, and my left leg is going to be called my inside leg. And that's the opposite if you're left-handed like I am. When I hit a forehand, my outside leg is my left leg, and my inside leg is my right leg. Now, the open stance is where, when you set up, if I drew a line between my outside leg and my inside leg, we're assuming I'm right-handed here, if I draw a line between my feet, that line is parallel with the baseline or with the net. The neutral stance is where the line in between my feet is perpendicular to either the baseline or the net, so it would form a 90-degree angle between the line in between my feet and the baseline. This is Andy Roddick hitting a forehand. And again, since he's a righty, that makes his right foot his outside foot and his left foot his inside foot. So if we draw a line between his 2 feet here, that line is now very close to parallel with the baseline, and that makes this forehand an open stance forehand. Now let's switch to a shot of him hitting another forehand, and his feet are now aligned a little bit differently. His front foot, his inside foot, is further into the court. So if we put a line between his feet now, that line is not as parallel with the baseline as the one before. It's closer to a diagonal. I would still consider this an open stance forehand, but it's getting close to a neutral stance. You can have totally open and totally neutral, which we'll get to in a second. And then in between there's a continuum, and the closer you get to the middle, then it sort of becomes a push. But right here, I would still consider this an open stance, but it's definitely a mild open stance. Now let's look at a totally neutral stance. This is Gael Monfils hitting a forehand, and if we draw a line in between his outside foot, again his right foot, and his inside foot, that line is perpendicular with either the baseline or the net. If Gael stepped further across his body with his inside foot, his left foot, so that it was across his outside foot, that is what we would call a closed stance. And this is a shot of what a closed stance looks like. This is Hyung-Taik Lee hitting with a closed stance. His inside foot, his left foot, is across his outside foot. And you very rarely will hit a forehand like Hyung is here. He's doing this because he was forced to by either his court positioning or the type of ball his opponent hit him. 99% of the time, you're going to hit with either a neutral or an open stance. 99% of the time, Hyung-Taik Lee hits with either a neutral or an open stance. So that other 1% of the time, you hit with a closed stance because you are forced to. But you want to avoid hitting like that if you can.